Okay, so this is Todd Atkins, and I'm here with Daniel Herbertson. And for people that may not know you, maybe you could kind of introduce yourself as far as the MMA world is concerned.
Yeah, sure. So these days I run a gym in Australia, Absolute MMA. I come and run the gym. We've got three locations in Australia, and we've also got a location in Thailand and Shanghai. If you follow Jiu-Jitsu at all, we've got Craig Jones and Lachlan Giles. So those are two guys that really made waves at the last ADCC. A couple of the top grapplers in the world. They train out of Absolute MMA. And got a really good MMA team as well with a few top level Australian guys like Roger Shippen, Jack Jenkins, Sam Hibbard. Big MMA team in Australia. But prior to that, I suppose what people would have perhaps heard, well, where people probably would have heard my name was I spent 7 years living in Japan, working as a journalist and photographer, covering the mixed martial arts scene mainly around Asia Pacific.
Now, how did you transition into taking over that gym?
After the earthquake in 2011, the MMA scene really died. Or the MMA scene in Japan really died. I went from doing like, two events a week kind of thing, to I don't think there was an event for like a major event for like 8 months, a year, something like that. It was a long time before they had a big event after that. Um, Sometime after the earthquake, MMA Fighting, which was the website that I was working for, got bought out, and I got made redundant during that just because I hadn't been doing anything for a fair while because of the earthquake. I did worked freelance in Japan for a while, but there was like following that. But then I just had some stuff coming on back in Australia, and it felt like my time in Japan was coming to an end. So I moved back, looked for a job in the MMA industry in Australia. I tried to work within the news industry here and journalism, photography again, but there really wasn't the scene or the work. Nothing here was going to be able to support that as a full-time endeavor. So I got a job doing marketing for a mixed martial arts gym. At the time, it was a relatively small gym. And then a couple of years later, I got offered to buy in as a partner, and ended up running the gym myself and expanding it and stuff.
Now, I had Jake Hune on here. I know he had been training there some. I don't know if you want to
Yeah.
even comment about what happened to him. But, I
Um,
saw he got in some trouble. I knew him from Hawaii. He played for University of Hawaii. I lived there, and he was playing
yeah.
for his
I think
football
did he
team.
interview on your show?
He did, yeah. I mean, I know
Yeah, yeah,
him,
yeah.
and then he kind of fell off the face of the earth, and then all that news broke. I don't know how much you want
Yeah.
to say about that, but
Yeah, I won't say much because his case still is pending. He during lockdown. So Jake was in Australia with us. We in my state, Victoria, we went through an 8 month lockdown where to the point where you couldn't leave your house unless you were going out to buy essentials. You couldn't travel more than 5 kilometers, and essentially all businesses were shut, including our gym. So Jake was with us during this time. I won't go into the details as to what happened, but other than to say that he was misled by a friend, and has now been he was picked up by police and he's awaiting trial. So we're just waiting he hasn't had a chance to represent himself or anything yet. So his case hasn't been heard. He hasn't gone to trial or anything like that. But we're hoping that he can represent himself well and honestly in the trial, and hopefully that gets recognised and he gets released. But he's been held for a few months now just because there's been so many delays, or the whole process is just slowed due to the virus. It slowed everything right down.
yeah, it's unfortunate because he was starting to do pretty good in Horizon.
Yeah, I'd say he's probably at the peak of his career, to be honest. Yeah, he was looking at a title shot next, and he was looking at some of the trying to get some big names. So yeah, it's really at the peak of his career.
So let's kind of talk about this interview you did with the Miro Mijatovic, because you
Yeah.
know I would say you were the first person to kind of get some of this stuff that a lot of people suspected with Pride. You were the first person in like English speaking media to get some of this stuff
hmm
on the record. Maybe talk to me about how the interview came about.
Um, trying to remember the order of events. I I believe it happened before K1 went bankrupt. Um, so I think that there was some news about K1 selling all of its licenses and properties to a. This is back when K1 was running the World Grand Prix and was in its second incarnation under FEG. So it was at its peak essentially. And I got a tip from somebody that they had transferred all of their licenses, trademarks, holdings, library, and everything to a real estate company. And it came only like a month after they received like a massive investment from a Chinese investment bank. So they've received this huge investment. I can't remember. I think it was like 31 million or something, which was huge at that time. Received this big investment, and then like a month later declared bankruptcy. And I'd heard rumors that a few fighters hadn't been paid. So I started reporting this news, and it resulted in me getting some threats. And I had to go to a couple meetings as a result of this. But you know, I heard about some fighters not getting paid, and was fairly determined to share the story for that reason, because I felt like those people deserved to be represented. And you started to hear some of the foreign fighters mention it as well. So I was kind of determined to follow it for that reason. And as I was reporting on that, Miro reached out to me. So Miro Mijatovic used to be most famously, he was manager of Crow Cop for a long time, and also manager of Fedor, both when they were in their prime in Pride and K1. But he reached out to me and asked me. He told me who he was. I actually hadn't heard of him before, but he told me who he was and asked if I'd be interested in an interview. And of course, I said yes. And I got asked to. I shopped the interview around, and I filmed it for a show that was on Spike TV, and wrote about it for magazine, I think, as well, Fighters Only magazine or something like that. And yeah, he brought the story to me, and I just went to his office one day and filmed with him, and was kind of shocked to hear what he had to say, but he had evidence and everything to back it up. So it was, yeah, it just kind of fell on my lap, to be honest.
Now you got some threats for reporting on what you were doing. How can you kind of elaborate on that, or?
Um, I had it is such a long time ago. I had some fairly indirect threats, or just kind of just other people within the industry told me to be careful. And I had the Kazuyoshi Ishii, the owner of K1, or the founder of K1 rather. He wasn't the owner because he had done some time for tax evasion. But he wrote an article which felt like it was a veiled threat against me, for reporting about this stuff. And yeah, I just had other people within the industry who kind of knew me and probably knew where I was ignorant, and they gave me the heads up that I was getting into some trouble by writing about this stuff. But you know, it didn't get too heated or anything. It was all indirect, but it was all like I didn't probe too hard. It was all stuff that was on the public record. It's not like I was digging too deep or anything. It was kind of not really necessary.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, I think most American MMA fans, or even people that were in Japan like myself, we can't read the Japanese media stuff for the most part unless, people are
Yeah.
fluent in that. So it's hard to know kind of the inside stuff. And so so he wrote this article where he was kind of was he I mean, he didn't say you by name, but maybe wasn't implying that.
No, he didn't say me by name, but he was specifically he was referring to basically a boy that is playing a man's game, not realizing the game that he's playing. That was the gist of the analogy that he was trying to draw. But it's kind of like an analogy in a foreign language and then translated into English. It doesn't always really make that much. It doesn't make direct sense like that. But it was brought to my attention by Japanese media as well, and they informed me what they believed it to mean.
Now, so when you go to talk to Miro, he's starting to put out a lot of stuff too. Were you kind of nervous about as you're filming the
No, I
interview?
asked him about this, but the people had had dealings with him in particular, they'd pretty much been locked up, and he didn't feel as though he had any more threat on him. So he'd started to speak openly about it. Did you want me to give a rundown, basically, of what he'd said?
Yeah, sure. I think that'd be good for people that haven't heard it.
Yeah, so I got invited into his offices, and he showed. I think he had one of Fedor's belts there, and he had photos and everything of him with Fedor, Krokop, a lot of guys. So he's a Croatian lawyer and manager. Also spends a lot of time in Australia, but he lives in Tokyo, and he was manager to Krokop, Fedor, and that was his main two. But I think there's some other guys as well during their prime in K1 and in Pride. And he told me about an incident where while he was managing Krokop, while he was managing Fedor, he was signed. He was Pride champion, and he was had a contract disagreement with Pride, and Fedor. They had their New Year's Eve event coming up, and Fedor signed to fight on Inoue Bombayer on New Year's Eve, which was on New Year's Eve in Japan. It's the biggest year in television. Basically, everyone watched TV in Japan, and for a few years there, the New Year's Eve MMA events were absolutely massive, rating hits and extremely competitive. There was one or 2 years at least where there was like 3 big MMA events all on at the same time, all competing with each other. So it became like a very hot competition there, where Pride put on their own New Year's Eve event, and their reigning heavyweight champion fought on Inoue Bombayer. So Fedor had booked this fight, and Miro got kidnapped by the Yakuza who were in control of Pride at that time, or at least Pride contracted a family to pick him up. They kidnapped him and took him to a hotel room in Kobe. Miro's like 6'8". He's a massive dude. So it's kind of funny to picture him being kidnapped. But he said he was kidnapped by 4 people and took to a hotel room in Kobe, where they held a gunpoint to his head and told him to get Fedor to pull out of the fight, to cancel the fight. And I think they also wanted him to sign over his contract to somebody else. But they held him there for 4 days, and eventually Miro says, "Well, I'm 6'8". If you shoot me, what are you going to do with my body?" And he gets up and calls their bluff basically and walks out. And they chased him for the next few years, and he was basically hiding from the Yakuza, moving his family constantly, and he contacted, and Fedor ended up having the fight anyway. But Miro ended up contacting the Japanese version of the FBI, like the Federal Police, NPA, and worked with them to expose the Yakuza connections in Pride, because it was extremely obvious at that point. And he worked with the NPA to cut. The first thing that they did was cut off their TV deals and all of their sponsorships, which ultimately bankrupted Pride. We'll put them into a position where they were bought out by the UFC because they couldn't get on TV anymore. So that was Miro's work with the NPA that led to that. And he was chased down by them for quite a long time as a result of that. And one of the lawyers that Miro worked with was kind of a fairly well-known and outspoken opponent of Yakuza in all fields, like all areas, not just MMA. But he ended up, they ended up catching him, and he was murdered in the Philippines. Like he was one of Miro's partners in the work, but Miro managed to avoid them for these years, and only in the last few years has he started to come out and actually talk about what happened.
So it's believed that they were the ones behind the guys killing in the Philippines.
There's I can't recall his name, but he is a journalist and a lawyer, and he hung himself in a hotel room with a prostitute in the Philippines. That's a textbook way for Yakuza to commit murder, because you get killed with you commit suicide, or they stage it to commit suicide, and then you are there with a mistress. It stops the family asking questions, or a prostitute stops the family asking questions. People don't probe too hard, but it wasn't suicide. He just been murdered.
Yeah, similar to Marista in DSE.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's just their standard method of operation. Yeah.
Now, when this interview comes out, were you getting more? Did you get any more fallout similar to what you got with K1?
I had while it was airing, I had someone tell me to stop it from airing, which I can't do anything. But I ended up leaving Japan the next day, the day after it aired. That was just a coincidence, but I was kind of glad I did. I was just on my way out. So the day it aired, the day after it aired, I left the country. But yeah, it wasn't because I was running away or anything. It was just a coincidence.
So people reached out to you after it aired, or?
As it was airing, I had someone contact me and said to stop it.
Wow. So after it airs and everything, what was kind of the response? Did you get a lot of emails or contact from people after that?
Probably not really, because I was moving on from the industry myself. Like I had basically left the role that I was in. I didn't really do much in journalism beyond that. I did a show on, like, One FC was just getting started at that point, so I did a documentary on them for the same TV show. But after that, I didn't really continue working in the field too much, and I dropped off Twitter and all the other ways in which people were communicating with me, because it wasn't necessary for my work anymore. So I really didn't hear that much afterwards, to be honest.
Now let's kind of talk about I know you traveled with Enson to some of these areas that were hit by the tsunamis and stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, this is obviously after the earthquake. I had come to know Enson very well due to my issues with K1, like the Yakuza stuff, after I found that K1 was going bankrupt. Enson was one of the people that kind of helped me through that. So I came to know him through there after the earthquake, and we'd hung out a bit afterwards as well. He's a really, really good guy. But after the earthquake, he contacted me and said, he gave me a call and said, I'm going up north to check out Fukushima, and I want to see what happened with the earthquake. Do you want to come? And I said, yeah. I said I had no fights going on, so I said, yeah, I'll do it. And he says, I'm leaving in like 30 minutes. You can get here. And it's like, it took me like 25 minutes to get to his house. And I was like, man, I might need a little bit longer. And he says, you need to get here now. I'm like, all right. I just just threw a couple clothes in a bag of my camera and got there as quick as I could. But yeah, we were just off as soon as I arrived. We just drive straight up north. Um, we were looking to, at first we wanted to go into Fukushima, and we drove towards. He wanted to get in and see the power plants because at that time there was some conspiracies going on about the conditions of the power plants there. I think it was before that it was known that there was two that were in meltdown rather than one. One had like really bad external damage but wasn't in meltdown or something. I can't remember exactly, but there was some confusion or conspiracy over the conditions of the reactors, and Enson wanted to go check it out himself. So we drove up to Fukushima. But as we're getting up there, we're like realizing how badly equipped we are to go into a nuclear reactor. We didn't even have a Geiger counter, so we were like driving up there, and we were stopping to talk to locals in the area, asking them how they get in to into the zone around the reactor to see like how do you do it safely. And they've all got Geiger counters, and they talk about how there's pockets of radiation that are just like really extreme. And obviously you can't feel anything or see anything, so you need to carry Geiger counters around. And it was too dangerous and like really no point to do it until we had the Geiger counters. So we didn't end up going in there, but we went up north because we continued to go further up north along the coast there where the tsunami had hit the worst, just to see if there was some relief effort that we could do. Enson had also heard stories of some Chinese mafia basically pillaging the villages that had been hit by the earthquake. None of that was ever confirmed, but he wanted to go up there to see if that was happening because he was going to do something about that. Yeah, just kind of get a better picture for what happened ourselves. So we spent, I can't remember, maybe two weeks, I think, basically driving through every city that we, like the worst cities that we could find. Would go to cities and ask around it, have you heard how bad it is? Like, where's the worst place around here and whatnot. So because this is fairly early, there wasn't much reporting on it yet. So we drove around all of these cities that were like just completely devastated. And we'd just write about what we were doing. I was writing an article day, and Enson was on Twitter or whatever social media he was using, and we would he opened up a PayPal account, and we were just documenting what we were experiencing, what we were seeing. And people were donating money so we could go and buy supplies and clothing and whatnot for people who'd survived but had lost their homes. And we just delivered it around to the relief centres, just kind of giving people a direct way to donate because there hadn't been, none of the charities had come in yet. There was some frustration about the Red Cross receiving an enormous amount of donations, but none of the relief had actually gone out, and it was kind of frustrating to see that nothing was being done. So we went up there to try and help in that regard. So yeah, pretty much every day we were driving to a new city and finding the relief centres. Enson was talking to guys that he knew about if anyone was kind of misbehaving in the area, as in any of the criminals. And we would just kind of go to all the relief centres and deliver stuff that Enson and other people donated.
Now, how did you, looking back on it, being there in that moment, how did that affect you?
After, like, it felt important. It was kind of big, actually. It felt important. It felt real, especially coming from doing like sport journalism. This was something real, and we were doing something meaningful in helping people. Like we raised quite a bit of money and managed to donate quite a lot. PayPal ended up making us give back all the money, or rather, they just took it out of the account because we weren't a registered charity. So, like, I don't know, it could. I understand why they had to do it, but it meant that like we had to pay for everything out of pocket. It was like 60 or 70 grand or something that we donated out of pocket, which was supposed to be donations from other people. After that, I was like considering going and doing war photography or like fairly more intense kinds of journalism, or more, you know, things that aren't revolving around sport. I was quite interested in that for a while, but fell into a good job and a good life back in Australia, so I never did it. But it took a while for me to, because after that I started hanging out with Enson quite a lot. Like we were hanging out pretty much every day ever since that trip. Not every day, but very, very frequently ever since that trip. And it took a while, and when I came back to Australia, to really recognise what kind of life I'd kind of slipped into, and it took a while to integrate that, I suppose. But it was really meaningful, and it was not boring, and it took a while to adjust to life without that kind of stuff happening, you know.
Yeah, and when it aired, I know you put it out on YouTube, and I think like Vice had something on it as well.
Yeah, oh, yeah. There's a few outlets that I did it for. I wrote daily articles and did videos and stuff too. Again, I got picked up a couple, and then I think there was a couple other things subsequent to that we did too. Yeah, I mean, it was big. It was, I mean, Enson still does trips to this day. Like, I don't know how many times he's been up, but kind of goes up a couple of times a year just to check on the people that are rebuilding and everything.
Now, you go back to Australia, and what was it like at first when you left Japan? Because you had such a big involvement with Japan with some, these things. How was it to adjust? Because it was weird for me, to come back to the U.S. What was it like for you to come back to Australia?
Yeah. How long did you live in Japan?
Well, I only lived there 3 years, but it's
Yeah.
a place I really enjoyed living, and yeah,
Yeah.
it was difficult to come back actually.
Yeah, it took me a while. It's just such a different pace of life. I mean, the culture is just completely different, and I was there for a long time. I really adjusted to the culture. Like, it changes. Like, living in such a different culture changes your perspectives on life. It changes what you believe to be important. It changes all kinds of things about your character. And I kind of lived there fairly deeply and quite a while. Coming back it took a long time, I suppose. The pace of life is very different. I would be out doing something 6 days a week easy in Japan. There was just so much to do. I was living in Shinjuku area, and eating out nearly every meal. Such a big and close social life, and obviously around like an amazing fight scene. It was that. And by the end of it, I was kind of flying around all over Asia Pacific covering fights and stuff too. It was incredible. Coming back to Australia, which basically didn't really have much of an MMA scene. The cage was not even legal in Victoria, like my state. When I came back to Australia, it took a couple of years for the cage to be legal. So, I mean, it's come a long way since then. But when I came back, there was not much going on. So, for a while there, I wasn't really sure what direction I was going to go, but I'm glad that I fell into another gym, like an MMA gym here, that allowed me to kind of find my footing and adjust to a different pace of life and different style of life.
Now, let's talk about the fight scene in Japan, because a lot of people weren't there in the middle of it. Maybe talk about it in your own impressions.
Yeah. So yeah, the reason I moved to Japan was to I just loved Japanese MMA or martial arts in general. I finished my degree in a university degree. Already had landed a job and just had this not like a nervous breakdown or anything kind of clinical like that, but it was more. I just had this crisis where I realized I don't really like what I'm doing. I don't like the trajectory of my life. I don't like what I studied, and I don't really want to work in this avenue. And I just had this massive passion for MMA, so I'm just moved to Japan just to be amongst it for a while, and I wanted to get as close as I could get to the scene. So I mean, I started training over at a Shuto gym with Hatsuyoki, fought in the UFC. It was a good Japanese fighter. Was training with him and taking photos of him in the gym. They managed to get recognized just from posting them on forums, and I get invited to work for Sherdog. It was the first gig that I got. And that opened a door to me to every event in Japan. I had, Western media credentials, so I just contacted literally every event that was all over the country. So I was traveling every weekend to sometimes 3 events a week most of the time. All these different kinds of scenes as well. So you have things like Pancrase and Shuto, which predate UFC. Shuto started in, I think, like 1987, but it's full mixed martial arts. It started like so much before the UFC. Pancrase started a couple years earlier as well. There's all kinds of different shows. Some have a lot of pro wrestling influence. Some take kind of, they lean into the underworld stuff and have more gritty cage fights, or there were some events where you could see Yakuza guys fighting each other. There was everything that you could imagine, and there was one that Shuto itself runs essentially like a sport. You have grades, like you have different classes, and they have national, internet, like state level, prefecture level, city level, national level championships and everything, and it's run like a sport. Like purely like a sport, so different than MMA is promoted right now. So the MMA scene was massive, and there was so much variety in there, and so much fun in there as well. Like it's entertainment there too. They, especially in events like Pride and K1, they make the guys like superheroes. The writer of the Pride advertising and media and stuff was a comic book writer, and the fighters over there were superheroes, and it kind of just had a different atmosphere to the way that MMA is marketed today, or marketed in the West in general. And it's just an incredible scene, and I was fortunate enough to get a gig doing photography, which got me ringside or cage side at pretty much everything eventually.
Now, maybe talk about the first time you went to a Pride event, or first time you went to Korakuen Hall. I always like to get people's impression of these places, because Korakuen Hall is a legendary place. A lot of people never had a chance to go there, or Tokyo Dome. Just kind of.
Korakuen Hall's amazing. That's probably my favorite venue just because of the history. Every pro wrestling event in Japan, no matter how big or small, has run a show at Korakuen Hall. It's got pro wrestling, kickboxing, MMA. So I don't know what it's like these days, but I mean, back when I was there, they were running at least 2 shows a day. They'd have a day show and an evening show. You go down the stairs. It's up on like the 7th or 11th floor or something like that. You go down the stairs to exit the hall, and there's graffiti all, which is really uncommon. Graffiti all down the hall, just like Sharpie graffiti. With people drawing like images of their favorite wrestlers and fighters. All these fighters have signed the walls and everything. It's just awesome. And really tight, like good atmosphere in the venue too. It's so different. It's just purpose built for fighting. There's not many venues that are purpose built for fighting. But you've got quite a few of them in Japan. The Budokan is another one. It's mainly for other martial arts, but they run a lot of events there too. It's just a stadium built for fighting, and it feels like that. Like the way that it kind of closes in around the ring, it's just perfect. You know, all the stadium seating going up at the perfect angle. The people talk about how quiet the Japanese crowds are, and that's true. But they're also loud sometimes too. And the difference between when they're quiet and when they're loud makes it an awesome atmosphere, because it just comes in waves. Like if nothing's happening, people are quiet, and if something great happens, you just feel this wave of energy come through the whole place. It's awesome. It's different than if people were just yelling or screaming through the whole thing, you know. But yeah, I mean, there was so many times where like it was absolute dream job. You just get ringside down to a show like a World Grand Prix, like K1 World Grand Prix final or a Pride event, and so many times I just got down there, kind of find my place at ringside, and it just blows you away the amount of production and stuff that they put into these shows, and it's just so exciting to see what every single one was like, because every show was different. Every show has different themes. Every show has different kind of music and energy and everything like that. Especially, I cover a lot of UFC events as well, but especially like every UFC event is the same. Everyone's the same. The fights are great, the highest level it's ever been, but every event is the same. But it's never like that with the Japanese MMA events. It's always, everything is always different.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up. You feel like the UFC events, it's kind of the experience is the same each time.
Yeah, it's like a Vegas show where you go to see like a Vegas performer. They do the same show every day, kind of thing. But it literally is. Esther Lynn, like the photographer as well, she pointed it out to me, because I'd never really been to that many UFCs because I didn't come to Asia Pacific very often at that point. The first one I was with Esther at the event, and I commented how awesome it was, and she's like, "Yeah, but it's the same every single time. Like it's the same highlight video, the same music, the same playlist that they play before the show. I don't know what's like these days. They might have changed it, but the whole thing was just literally the same show. You know, those black on white talking head to start the show. Like it's just very formulaic. When like one of the Pride Grand Prix, the poster for the show was sperm, and it was a World Grand Prix, like a World Grand Prix with open weight Grand Prix, where they're finding the best open weight fighter in the world, and it was the poster was sperm rushing towards the egg, and it had the text for the poster was 1 in 6 billion, as in representing the population of Earth. And it was the open weight Grand Prix. It was just beautiful. So good. So good. And the mark, like the way that they produce the actual live shows as well. You just never know what you're going to get. Like you'd never expect sperm to be on a poster in the UFC. But it was something awesome about it. Loved it.
So let's kind of talk about, because I asked you if you had seen the Jake Paul Vin Askren fight. How much of that event did you watch last night?
Nothing. I watched about 15 seconds of the knockout on a highlight posted on social media somewhere. You know, I mean, so I didn't. I'm not. I think it was the first round anyway. I didn't think the fight went very long, but that was terrible. That was absolutely terrible.
I mean, people are ripping the event, because it had a lot of performers, maybe like 4 or 5 musical performances, and
yeah.
But I see a lot of ex-fighters saying, "I want to do that." They see the paydays were really big.
Yeah,
I
well,
think every
Askren got
single
like
fighter made at
what
least
did he
$100
get?
grand.
$500,000 or something.
Yeah, I think Askren got, yeah, I think around that much. But even like the lowest was like $100 grand. So
Well, people want to see they want to see them lose. They want to see them lose, and they'll be willing to pay to see them lose, I guess. Like, I don't know. I don't like it. I would struggle to spend my own money on it. 'Cause unless Jake Paul gets knocked out, I'm not going to be happy. And Ben Askren's not going to do that.
But I see a lot of ex fighters like Jeff Curran and Chris Lieben, all these guys saying they want in on some of these fights. If whether it's Jake Paul or somebody else.
Oh, I mean, if they can, you see a lot of older or guys when they're done with their MMA career or UFC career, starting to do things like bare knuckle boxing, and I prefer that they go down the route of fighting YouTubers than get into bare knuckle boxing too much. If they're able to make money, if they're able to entertain, some of these fighters are good entertainers too. They don't necessarily need to be competing in their prime all the time. We can still appreciate them as entertainers. If they can do that in a way that doesn't result in them risking their brains or their bodies too much, then I'm all for it.
Yeah, it kind of has some of the Pride Circus feel, having the YouTuber versus
Yeah,
Ben
I
Askren.
mean, that's another aspect of things that Japan have really explored, in that you see a lot of older fighters go on talk shows over there and competition shows and stuff, doing things like wrestling and sumo. There was one sumo event that they did with MMA fighters and K1 fighters. I think Semi Schultz won it from memory, but I think Fedor was in it. There's all these MMA fighters in it, and they did a massive sumo competition. Pretty sure Semi Schultz won. It was a long time ago. And yeah, they get paid. They should get paid. They're good entertainers, like to see that kind of stuff.
Now let's talk about your competitors at your gym, because I mean, Craig Jones and Lachlan Giles, some of these guys are really exploding in the grappling world. Maybe talk about that
Yeah,
a little bit.
yeah. We have. You kind of need those guys. Like you need once you've got one guy at that level, like at that elite level, it rises the tide a lot. So the once we started to have some of our competitors really get some good results, like we'd won quite a few world champions, and we'd had success at world championships as a team as well. I think we won a bronze one year for no-gi. Maybe it was just in the female division though, not the male or open, or the combined rather. But we'd started to have quite a lot of success as a team, and then a few years back we opened up another gym and partnered with Lachlan Giles, who was studying his PhD. He's a physiotherapist, studying for his PhD and also teaching for us. So we partnered with him to open up a new location of our gym. And when he partnered up with us and when he finished his studies, he was able to focus full time on his jiu-jitsu. He was always like a good competitor, but he'd never got great results. But once he was able to focus on jiu-jitsu, his level just exploded. And he went from a good local competitor to what he did at ADCC only a few years later. So he really brings a very logical and cerebral approach to jiu-jitsu that people find refreshing, I think. And with guys like Craig Jones training here as well, Kit Dale was also here at that time. Training with those guys, training together, their level just went through the roof very, very quickly, and attracted a lot of other guys as well who contributed to the level raising in the gym.
And maybe tell me about, because I know MMA obviously is getting more popular there with Robert Whitaker, Israel
Yeah.
Adesanya is popular in Australia, and how about the grappling?
MMA
Is it increasing that overall?
Melbourne, at one point, I don't know what it's like now. Melbourne at one point, or Victoria, had the number one expenditure per capita in the world for mixed martial arts, for UFC. So more people per capita in Melbourne or Victoria were purchasing pay-per-views than anywhere else in the world. So mixed martial arts is quite popular here. It's not really mainstream. Like you don't see Robert Whittaker or Volkanovski or anybody on TV. But it's extremely popular. You see it in all the bars and pubs and stuff, and it's been popular for a long time. But when I first came back to Australia, the cage wasn't legal here. It took a few years. It was 2000 and I don't remember. After a couple of years, the cage became legal, and then the UFC came to town, and that saw MMA go to another level as well. So we had like Holly Holmes versus Ronda Rousey here, which was a massive fight. And a couple other UFC events have been big here as well. So it's big in Melbourne, but this is one of the most busy sporting cities in the world. Like we have Formula One here, we have like Australian Open tennis here, which is on the world tour. We have quite a lot of big sport here, so it's pretty competitive. But MMA is still big here.
And so, what do you see the future as far as like what you're doing with your gyms and stuff?
We're probably going to continue to open up additional locations once kind of COVID stuff settles down. We'll just keep expanding in different ways as well. I'm probably going to be getting into promoting myself this year, opening up additional gyms, that kind of thing. But we had plans, but COVID's kind of put a pause on that for the moment, at least. It's more about recovery at the moment, but we've still got some interesting things coming up.
Well, again, I want to thank you for taking time to do this. And I was wondering, anyone who's listening to this, there's something you want to leave the interview on, or something you want to let people know about?
I will say that I went to it's not like going to Japan was handed to me. It was just a choice that I made. I chose to go to Japan and follow like this really interesting career, or something that felt important and interesting to me, just because I chose to do it. I was, I'd already finished a degree, I'd had a job, but I was really unhappy, and I had something that made me happy, and I just chose to go and do it. And it's not like there's this barrier between between me and actually taking the leap to move to Japan or anything, as I'm sure that you experience. It's just a matter of doing it. And I'd encourage anybody that if they do have an interest to go to somewhere like Japan or follow a passion that they perceive to be too difficult or too far away or anything like that. Like you can just do it a lot of the time. A lot of the difficulties in your head, and I would encourage anybody who has an interest in moving to Japan but it feels impossible to just figure it out and do it, because it is certainly possible, and it was the best experience of my life.
Actually, before we go, Ryzen obviously came up now. So what do you think, looking back on, your departure from Japan, seeing Pride fall apart? It was heartbreaking for me to see that stuff too. I love Pride and K1. So now that you're seeing Ryzen kind of pop up again, what are your feelings on that? Because I doubt you're like Sakaki Barra's favorite person on earth, probably, right? Do you know if he?
I don't know. I mean, you probably got no idea who I am, to be honest. Look, I like it. I love watching the show. I think like guys like Tenshin, especially, I love watching him fight. It's got some great stuff going on, and I'd like to see the scene as a whole continue to find a place there, a balanced place, where, because the gyms aren't big in Japan, like they don't have a lot of money in them. There's not much of the gyms in Australia, for example, are just so completely just on another level compared to the gyms in Japan. I'd like to see the whole industry at all levels kind of grow and succeed. because they're not. While they run some of the best shows in the world, their training facilities and the lives of the fighters aren't necessarily on the level that they could perhaps deserve to be. So I'd like to see it trickle down a bit, you know.
Yeah, for sure. So again, Dan, I want to thank you for doing this, and maybe when you get back to promoting, we can catch up on something.
Sure. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks, Tom.